It's the Locked On Flyers podcast for Thursday, March 27th, your daily dose of Flyers news, analysis, and high quality content that is wondering what we can accomplish with less than 10 games left in the season now.
It's an interesting thought.
You're Locked On Flyers, your daily podcast on the Philadelphia Flyers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, and thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen every day. I am Rachel Donner. I've been podcasting about the Flyers, the NHL, and hockey for a decade. I'm here with prospect expert and Flyers credentialed reporter for 19 years, Russ Cohen. To keep up with our latest episodes and Flyers news, you can find us at Locked On Flyers on all your favorite socials. And of course, here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are going to preview tonight's matchup against the Montreal Canadiens, who are in a playoff race right now, as well as dig into draft eligible prospect center Jake O'Brien, who is a very interesting option for the Flyers in the first round. We'll get into his upside and potential downsides as well. But I think following up on the Flyers' performance against the Toronto Maple Leafs, and there is a big difference between the previous games they lost on the road on that road trip in terms of quality of play to the absolute stinker that they put up against Toronto. And, you could say exhaustion from the road trip. You could say the Leafs are that good relative to those other teams, but, they did play Dallas very well. So
Right.
all of that being said, I think that we're in a weird situation with John Tortorella at this moment, that post Four Nations, as we have talked about, there's just been a change in his demeanor, in his attitude. And, it continued after that Leafs game where he said, this falls on me. I'm not really interested in learning how to coach this type of season where we're at right now, but I have to do a better job. So this falls on me getting the team prepared to play the proper way until we get to the end being 9 games from now. Right. So
or maybe in his mind, the end is something else with him not having a job.
That's the interesting question.
He sounds like to me like a guy that has put in for his retirement and he's checking off the days on the calendar.
It is an absolutely valid reading of the situation. I think that he just has not been as thoughtful or as into the details. Like he's
Right.
always been a details guy.
Yes.
Right. And so you looked at him, and what he had to say around development camp or training camp and early in the season. And he would get into the finer points of various aspects of gameplay, whether it's defensive structure, even the power play, looking at the person, who's the right personnel for these particular situations. He just doesn't do that anymore.
No.
And it seems like very uncharacteristic of him as a coach to a large degree.
Yeah, I think, I've seen this just in my own family when I kind of knew my dad had had enough and he was going to retire. But you have to wait a certain amount of time to do it. And so I know what that feeling feels like. And that's what this feeling feels like to me. And so when you see that, yeah, he'll probably be honest about some things like he was, and then not honest about why he, benched Cam York for the rest of the game. He won't answer to that because he doesn't believe you or I should ask him that
or owed that answer.
And that's wrong. And of course it's not us, it's the fans. And that's the part that John has always not cared about. He cares about the fans. If he meets you, he'll tell you about the team, he'll pump up the team. But John, when he is doing that part of the job, doesn't care about the message to the fans. And at some point it matters because, you're going to see like there's going to be less engagement from fans in these, next home games.
Right. I absolutely believe that. And he seems a little more resigned to what this season has become versus what last season was, where he was going to fight until the bitter end, even though the team kind of collapsed again after the trade deadline to a large degree. It's a similar situation here with different kind of change of personnel, but nonetheless, there's been a little bit of a similar collapse here in some ways. And I think that, obviously this team was never going to make the playoffs this year.
No,
And there
we
was
didn't feel
more
it.
of a chance of it last year. That's the big difference. And I get that. But, with 9 games left against a group of opponents that are either in that wild card hunt or right next to the Flyers in
Mhm.
the draft pecking order hunt
Yeah.
or avoidance, however you want to phrase it there. But it's just a very interesting group of games, I think, for John Tortorella in particular to be coaching. Because again, we're going to talk about Montreal, but we're going to be at New York Rangers who are battling. We're
Right.
at Ottawa who are battling. We're going to be against Columbus who are battling. But we've got 2 games against the Sabres, right? We've got a
Yep.
game against Nashville.
Yep.
Those are the 2 teams on either side of the Flyers right now.
Mhm.
So, like, how do you coach? How does this version of John Tortorella coach out this season?
Well, I think we're seeing what this version's going to do. We all kind of wished what he would have done was left that other roster spot open, call up another young player, work that player
Right.
in, and give people the correct roles. But like last night, and people can go back and listen, we talked about how you already forced young players into different roles by not playing Cam York and how that affects all of it. So
Right.
right now, he is just going to do anything to win a game. And I mean anything. So now Nick Delorier probably plays out the year. Why should Nick Delorier play out this season? There's no reason for it, but
None.
this is what's happening. It's not like he's there protecting anybody. People are still getting cheap shotted. They got cheap shotted last game. Nick Delorier didn't do anything about it. So all of that is a misnomer, a lost leader, and some of it's a waste of time. Not so much that you're giving the players the time to play. That's not a waste of time. The development time is getting wasted.
Right. And this sort of continues something that has been discussed since last season, in that when John Tortorella was hired, there was a different plan in place, right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of a supposed retool, and Tortorella was going to coach a team that ostensibly was going to compete for the playoffs
Mm-hmm.
very soon. That did not happen. We got a new GM who was there before, but has a new plan.
Right.
Right. And so this new plan and this rebuild, like, we all kind of knew that this was just a square peg, round hole situation in terms of this kind of coach for this timing in a team's development, that it was not likely to work very well. And I think it worked well to a degree last season because the team wanted to outplay expectations. There was a
Right.
chip on the shoulder. That
Right.
does not exist this year.
No.
And so this kind of mismatch of coaching style and management needs, and who has the majority of the power here, like
Well,
it
that's
just,
always been the
it's not
problem.
working.
Right.
Right.
We know that how much power John has, and so that's always been an issue. And so you can't really do much else. Before the season's restarted after the Four Nations, you could have,
Right.
that maybe there could have been a meeting. They could have been a lot of things said to say, hey, this is the agenda for the rest of the year. Maybe the coach wouldn't listen to it anyhow, but at least, you try. And you could always fire the coach. That is always an option. And it seems like they don't want to do that because they don't want to tarnish John's reputation, whatever. I mean, that's a fine line in today's sports. It is.
Right.
And so, if you get another game, like let's just say Montreal, it's like, 7-2 again, it's not out of the realm of possibility that they have a discussion with John to ask him, what do you want to do here? What do you want to do about next year? And start addressing this.
Right. And I think, the questions have started to come up a little bit
Yes.
about that. And we're skirting around the edges of the actual question of, John, do you want to coach in the NHL
Right.
next season? Like, what
Or
do you
even
want to
right
do
now, do
here?
you still
Or,
want to
yeah,
coach?
like, we're at a point where it needs to be asked more directly. And I think that given, the history of this current regime, which I know isn't that long, but one of the things they emphasized was transparency. And I feel like this is a point here, even before the end of the season, which I know is a more quote unquote logical time to have
Mhm.
this public conversation. Like we're there. We have to have this public conversation about what the direction of the team is and who is the right coach to develop these young players, because it's not working.
Right. Well, I think the question's being asked by the fans because they're being asked for season ticket money.
Right.
And
That's
so,
fair.
like, and when they're talking to the people that they talk to with the Flyers, and they're probably saying, what is the plan for next year? I'm sure they're asking them, and they probably can't say anything. There's nothing they can tell them. And so that's a conundrum.
Yeah, and to be clear, I don't think there's necessarily like that John Tortorella is a bad coach or that
No,
Danny
but
Briere is a
everybody runs
bad
their
GM.
course.
I just think there's a mismatch
Yeah,
here
this has been a mismatch from the start.
that's not working.
Right.
And that both of them are very good at what they do in
Yeah,
certain circumstances. I just think this is not working.
right. I agree.
So that's where we're at. But once again, we've got another game to talk about. The Flyers are facing the Montreal Canadiens, who are battling for that wild card spot. We're going to talk about them coming up next. If you're like me, your mornings have to start off with a good cup of coffee. I got tired for settling for grocery store pods. It just wasn't cutting it. That's why I turned to Trade. And let me tell you, their coffee is next level. Trade is the number one specialty coffee marketplace in the US. They bring you fresh coffee from over 50 of the country's top roasters. Their experts have taste tested thousands of coffees, curating over 450 amazing roasts. Whether you're new to coffee or know exactly what you like, they will handpick the perfect match for you. And I found a local Philadelphia roaster that I'd always wanted to try. My first bag was a game changer. I've had two more since then, and I can absolutely taste the difference from my old coffee. Their subscription model makes it so easy. So there's no more last minute grocery store runs or settling for what's ever on the shelf. And right now, Trade is exclusively offering our listeners 40% off your first order at drinktrade.com/lockedonnhl. That's drinktrade.com/lockedonnhl for 40% off your first order. Drinktrade.com/lockedonnhl. On tomorrow's show, we will, of course, recap this game against Montreal and see if the John Tortorella trend continues or what the performance is, see if the motivation is there. It's going to be a big deal. Plus, we are going to preview the first of the two remaining games against the Buffalo Sabres this season. And last week, when we previewed the Dallas and Chicago games, we kind of looked at their like rebuild process
Right.
or their asset management processes and kind of compared them to what the Flyers are doing. And the Sabres have been a bit of a cautionary tale
Oh yeah.
over the past 10 years or so. And so we don't want the Flyers to get into that same trap. So we're going to talk about how the Flyers can avoid the Buffalo Sabres trap and get into that a little bit as our game preview for that one. But the Montreal Canadiens, this is the second of three games against Montreal. We've got another one coming up real soon as
Yep.
well. The Habs won the first matchup way back in October, 4-3. And interestingly, Alexei Kolosov was in net for that one. He had 20 saves on 24 shots in that game. And the Alexei Kolosov conversation has come full circle
I
here
guess.
again.
I don't know if he'll start in this game though. I don't
I
think
don't think
I don't think
so.
they're there yet.
No, I don't think so either. But just
It's
interesting
interesting. Yeah.
to bring up. Currently, the Montreal Canadiens, as of recording, are second wild card spot positioning right now. They're 4 points behind the Sens, with the same number of games played right now. But they have had an interesting path here, being 4-2-4 in their last 10, where they had an extremely rough patch leading up to Four Nations, where they couldn't string wins together. Then they seemed to recover after the rest they got over Four Nations, right?
Yep.
But they've been winning, but it hasn't been a dominant style of winning.
No,
right?
but they've been coming back in games. They're kind of dangerous even if
Yeah,
they're down because they have guys that can bring them back, like Caufield and Suzuki, and so that's been part of their DNA has been able to come back. But the one thing that's interesting, and I just wrote about it for Hockey News, is Sam Montembeault. He's in a spot that Sam Ersson was in last year because he's now
right.
playing a lot more games than he used to. He's on pace to playing maybe 60. And for any goalie in this era, that's a lot. And that's a lot more than he's used to. And so you're starting to see some mental issues with him, like being shots from far away, sometimes not locking in on, sometimes not being squared up to the shooter, flubbing a glove save that should be in. He just got replaced last game by Jakub Dobish. And so it's one of those things where he's in a weird spot because he has not played well in his last 3 games. They've given up a bunch of goals in these games, 4 goals, 4 goals, 5 goals, something like that. And so you look at that and you say, all right, there's an opportunity here. But the one thing is, and this is where, Torts' old protege, Martin St. Louis, they play a relentless style of offense. Their
Right.
defense isn't the best, and especially with Caden Gooley out, it's different. They can puck move, though, and they have Lane Hutson, who could go right around you like you're not even there. And we saw a little bit of that with the Leafs. And so that's a little bit of a worry, too, is what that impact might look like if the Flyers are a mess in their own zone.
Right, and I feel like that's something the last couple of years, like, even when the Habs weren't as good, they've been able to move the puck against the
Yes.
Flyers very consistently over the last couple of years, and, like, it's just this thing where the Flyers get frozen when it comes to playing up against Montreal, and you're right, Nick Suzuki has had tremendous success
Yes.
against the Flyers. And I think that he is definitely the most dangerous guy out there, for sure, against the Flyers. But I think that Martin St. Louis has figured out a style of play that matches up
Right.
very well
With his
against
personnel.
this structure. Yeah.
Yeah. No, he has. But they do go to shootouts. They lose games in overtime.
Hmm.
That is part of their DNA lately. Uh, you still have to worry about Caufield. He's on pace for 40 goals. The
Yep.
Caufield stuff for the draft. If he scores a goal or two, it's going to be tweeted about. It's going to be talked about. These things are all going to pop up again. So this is a game that definitely could get away from the Flyers. But if they play their game, they could be in this game because, Montreal is not a guaranteed playoff team, even though they're a point in it. It's much like the Flyers, what they were like last year, where they're just sort of like in this spot for the first time. And so they're susceptible. But I don't know what Flyers team's going to show up. I don't know what's going to happen with certain players, usage, all of that. So it makes it a lot harder now to try and figure out what the Flyers are going to do because they don't know what they're going to do.
Right, and I think the Habs have extra motivation because of their last game where they
Yeah,
lost 6-1 against the St. Louis Blues, who, by the way, are playing great
red
and
hot.
are on a tremendous trajectory to get into the playoffs here that nobody, I think, would have expected,
No, no.
like, a month or 6 weeks
They're not
ago.
playing Gloria, but they're doing everything else.
They're doing everything else, right? And so a 6-1 loss for the Habs is pretty bad, and they're gonna want some redemption here. And in that game in particular for the Habs, I do think the Blues played very well defensively, but the Habs were not executing to their usual
No.
level. And so I think they're gonna wanna get that under control. And so it's gonna be, I think, extra hard for the Flyers defensively.
Yeah. There are some matchup advantages for the Flyers. The Flyers' fourth line's better than the Habs' fourth line. The Habs have had trouble this year plugging in players there. They've and with certain injuries, their top nine's not as strong as it could be. So, this is a
Mhm.
winnable game. And this is a game that could get things going right again. But again, this is a game where the Flyers have to actually match their speed, match the Canadian speed, and try and be just as dynamic. Because if they're not, if they're just going to kind of like look for that extra pass, it's going
Yeah.
to be a problem. And that was a problem last game. A lot of players were just still looking for that extra pass, and it's like somebody's got to shoot.
Yeah, and I think, one of the other things we're gonna have to keep an eye out on is the Flyers and discipline, because if the
Yes.
Flyers go to the box, the Habs power play, Patrick Laine this
Yeah.
season has been so good. He's got 14 power play goals
He's
this season.
honestly, because he's not played a lot of games, he is the most effective power play guy in the
Yeah.
league. There's nobody even close. His
Yeah.
percentage is off the charts, and the shot is just what you would expect Patrick Laine to be. So yes, that's a big deal. If you put them on the power play, you're really in trouble.
Right. And that was sort of like the question mark with Patrick Laine, and he's, had problems in
Yeah.
multiple cities he's been to, but he seems to have settled into this role playing
Yep.
in Montreal of being a power play specialist. He's settled on that second line uh, for their 5-on-5 play,
Yeah.
but he's just been just such a huge contributor and allowing the Habs to stay in games sometimes where maybe they might not be otherwise. So
True.
I do think there's a lot to watch out for there. And then obviously we've mentioned Lane Hutson, who's had just a remarkable
He's
season.
remarkable to watch.
Yeah, and is a top contender for the Calder for
Yep.
sure. So I think that it's going to be a tough game, but it is a winnable game. And I think that for the Flyers right now, a win's a win. And I think everything under consideration, considering the draft order and everything,
Yeah.
winning against a team like Montreal is just helpful for everybody.
It is. I mean, there have to be some victories along the way that at least makes the team feel decent. Even if you want the team to
Yeah.
tank, there's still going to be some wins, and this one would make them feel pretty good. Again, because I think 20% or 25% of the building are going to be Habs fans too. I'm pretty sure of that.
Yeah. They could be on their way back home to Montreal from being snowbirds in Florida for
Right.
this season and
Right.
stopping along the way. That is certainly a possibility. All right, we will recap that game on tomorrow's show. In the meantime, the Flyers are constantly on a search for that center, and draft eligible prospect Jake O'Brien could be a potential candidate there. We are going to talk about him coming up next.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. When you have a new project that requires just the right hire to pull it off, the pressure's on, and every day without the right person's a setback. That's exactly when Indeed sponsored jobs come in handy. They make your post seen by the right candidates right now. Now you can spend up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed in this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, Indeed is all you need.
Okay, Russ. Jake O'Brien here. He is a 6'2" center. He could be a little bit more filled out, but he is only 17 years old. He doesn't turn 18 until June, so he's much younger.
There's
than a
runway.
lot. Yeah, there's a lot of room here, and he will bulk up over time, but he's not the smallest guy out there either. So
No.
good size for a 17-year-old. He's a Toronto area kid who currently plays for the Brantford Bulldogs in the OHL. And he was OHL Rookie of the Year last season. So this is his second year in the OHL. And Brantford is a very good team. And he plays 2C for Brantford behind Washington Capitals pick Patrick Thomas, who has 104 points this season, is tremendous. There's no way O'Brien was going to be 1C on this team.
No, you
Like,
can't.
not a chance, especially at 17 years old. Like,
Right.
come on. But that being said, for him to be 2C is a pretty big deal, right?
No, it's a big deal. I mean, there's some good and bad right now that you see, and the bad's not bad. It's just these are things that it makes me wonder about. So I think he's a high floor guy, and so I think he's a guarantee to play in the NHL. So there's that. And that's a reason why I have him where I have him, because I feel like he may not have the high end that some other players do, but he's going to make it. So there's the value in that. The one thing of concern is he gets 456 of power play time. 4 minutes, that's his average power play minutes, 456. So you have to take the points with a little bit of a grain of salt, because that's adding a lot to his points.
Right. So I pulled those numbers because I noticed that, right?
Yeah,
So 9 of his 32 goals are on the power play, which is a pretty high
it
percentage,
is.
I would say. And he has the most power play assists in the OHL, the
Yeah,
entire OHL, with 41 power
right.
play assists. So that's a lot. And I think that that is something to take into consideration. I think
Now,
with
on the positive side, he's a terrific passer on the power play. So there's a reason
Mhm.
he has a lot of those assists, and he does make some great choices, and he has good vision, and the passes are quick. I also wonder, is his 62%? This I got this from Instat. 62% of his shots are on net. So he's not really shooting from that far away. And so, like, is that going to be sustainable? Maybe, because he does need to put on, some bulk. And if he does do that in 2, 3 years, he might be getting to the net then. So I do think there's a possibility of that. He's
Well, and
46.
related to
Go ahead.
that,
Yeah.
he has, only 134 shots on goal this season, which if you look relative to the other people in his tier of scoring in the
Yeah.
OHL, much, much lower, right? But
Right.
he scored on 32 of those 134 shots on goal, which is pretty wild. And that
That's
means,
bonkers.
to your point, he's taking pretty much only high danger shots when he gets
Right.
in very good positioning, so they're
Correct.
more likely to go in. He's not taking the harder shots at all.
Right. Right. And that's not sustainable. So that's where you have to say,
Right.
okay, is he going to do the other things? Now, I will tell you, he does have a tricky escapability in the offensive zone, so I think he's a guy that will help him get close to the net, or at least at a point where he can shoot his wrist shot in. That's really good. His edge work's really good. He's not a burner. Do I know how much faster he's going to get? No, none of us do. But right now he's not a burner. His speed is okay. It's okay for the level he's at, and we'll see where it goes. But his edges are what's really good. I've noticed he has a short skating stride. It's not choppy, but it's short. And so right now that's working. Now, if they could lengthen the stride, maybe that's going to do something
Right.
for his speed. That's just something that I've noticed over time. We'll see if that's something that matters. He plays, a minute 45 on the PK, which is really good. That's his average for PK time. That's a big thing. He's averaging 40% defensive zone starts. That is unusually high, especially for a guy his age. So it just shows how much
And
faith
for
the
a guy
coaching
that's
staff,
producing like that.
and a guy that's producing like that, a lot of times they're deficient. So he is not
Right.
deficient on the other end at all. Now, where he is deficient is, does he lose some puck battles? Yeah, he does lose some puck battles. And sometimes does he lose the puck when he's trying to bring the puck up the ice? Yeah, once in a while he does. But he's going to make it. He's going to be a guy that needs work, and he's going to be a guy that is tantalizing. So, because when I have a guy eighth, he could go 3 or 4 spots lower than that. That's just where I have him in the list. And I feel like I have him there based on where the other centers are too, because I feel like
Right.
that's sort of how it's going to fall, but it's not a mock draft. But so I wouldn't pick him eighth. I wouldn't. But the tricky part of this is going to be, let's just say the Flyers are picking fourth and 14th. Well, I wouldn't pick him fourth, and I don't know if he's going to be there 14th. That's the tricky part
Right.
of this whole equation.
Yeah, and, once we get a little closer to the draft and in the
Yeah, then
Flyers
we'll have,
offseason, we're gonna
we'll
have
know.
the center conversation and
Yes.
compare them and kinda just do a center ranking.
Yeah.
But I think that, you have a really good point there. So you have him ranked 8th. As a general rule, like, that's the highest I've seen him
Yeah.
ranked. For everybody else, it's pretty much 10 is the highest I've seen. The
Yeah.
lowest is 26, but he's around 17 on average. So you have him,
I
a
think he's moving
significant.
up, though. I think you're going to
Right.
see the next rankings. It's going to be different. Just because I have my sheet out, just to give you an example. So his 46% on faceoffs is, pretty good. It's not good enough. Misa's 56%. So just to show you
Right.
the difference between the type of centers.
Yeah. I think he's a really interesting case. I
He
think
is.
with some of the other centers, there's more of a clear picture of what they're good at and what they're not good at and
Right.
what that means for for their potential. There's more questions with Jake O'Brien,
For
I would
sure.
say, than there
I mean,
are
they're
with some
mostly
of
good
the other guys.
questions. Like, there's no,
Right.
it's not like I don't know if he can make it. No, I know he can make it. Making it's not the issue. It's what he's going to be. That's what you wonder.
Right. And with the Flyers, they're looking for a 1C or maybe a 2C, right?
Right.
They're looking for that zone. He's like, well, he's probably a 2C
Right.
at the ceiling, but he could settle out as a 3C. And is that what the Flyers need right now? Probably not, but the guarantee, the low,
Right.
the low or the high floor is very appealing.
Like, I'll just give this as an example, and I am in no way comparing because I'm not. But I think when the Oilers drafted Ryan Nugent Hopkins and he ended up as their 2C for like forever, right? I think they've been okay with that, even where he was picked. So I think if you pick this guy and he ends up as your 2C, you're still fine with that. You're more than fine.
Right. Right. I think, then it's a matter of who's around him.
Right.
And finding the right teammates, because it is interesting. I think with Brantford, especially, their top line is absolutely dominant, and they have the top scoring guy in the OHL
Right.
on their team, right? Who's on the top line. So their top line is just dominant. But to have a guy on the second line who's not with those elite players who've already been drafted, to have this kind of success shows a lot.
It does.
And
I mean, he's able
so,
to create a lot.
Right. And that's why I don't want to talk him down too much, because there is a lot of potential here.
No, but there's a reason he's, people aren't looking him top 5, but I'm telling you, he's moving up. Like all these things we just gave, you're going to see it's different in a week, couple weeks.
All right. Well, we'll keep track of him. We're going to add him to the spreadsheet that is pinned to our socials. And there's a link in the show notes of all the players we've covered leading up to the NHL draft this year. On tomorrow's show, we'll talk Flyers versus Habs. We'll have that Sabres comparison that I talked about. As a reminder, we always want to hear from you. So if you've got mailbag questions or Flyers thoughts, let us know on any of our socials at Locked On Flyers. You can email us at lockedonflyers@gmail.com or comment on our YouTube channel. I'm Rachel. I'm on Blue Sky and Twitter at @rmiriam. That's RMIRIAM.
I'm Russ. I'm at Sportsology on the same socials, SPORTSOLOGY.
Thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen today. For your next listen, check out the Locked On NHL podcast. It brings you daily league-wide stories that matter with local coverage you love from Locked On. I'm there on Fridays, and then on Saturday for the Women's Hockey Report. Find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Have a great day, everyone.